afternoon. It's Thursday, July 14th. I'm Laura Cornfield, and this is IBA News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. One of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's former top aides was questioned by police today as part of an ongoing corruption probe. IBA political correspondent Kalev Ben-David has the details. Kalev?
Thanks, Laura. Ari Harrow, who stepped down as chief of staff to Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2015, was detained for questioning by officers from the police's major crimes unit after landing at Ben Gurion Airport this morning. The U.S.-born Harrow, who has also served as a foreign policy advisor, campaign manager, and fundraiser for Netanyahu, has been one of the prime minister's closest aides over the past decade. Harrow was previously questioned by police last December as part of an investigation examining the $3 million sale of 3H Global, a private consulting company he set up while outside of government service. It is not clear at this stage if the Prime Minister is directly involved in that probe or if Harrow's questioning is also linked to a separate corruption investigation revealed this week by Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit. According to some reports, Mandelblit is checking whether unauthorized sums of money donated from abroad may have found their way to Netanyahu or other members of his family. The Prime Minister's office has dismissed all such speculation as baseless, saying that, as with past corruption allegations against him, these suspicions will amount to nothing. Meanwhile, in Washington, a report issued by a U.S. Senate subcommittee investigation has concluded that funds contributed by the State Department to an Israeli non-governmental organization ended up indirectly aiding efforts to unseat Prime Minister Netanyahu in the 2015 election. In 2013, the State Department gave, via the U.S. Embassy and Consulate in Israel, $349,000 to the group One Voice, which promotes a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. According to the Senate report, these funds were used to develop a database of Israeli voters and other resources for activists, which One Voice later made available to another group called V15 that was expressly set up with the purpose of defeating Netanyahu at the polls. The report concluded that no action should be taken against State Department officials because they had acted within existing guidelines, but said more steps should have been taken to prevent the funds from being used to help develop a partisan political infrastructure. Israel's Central Elections Committee cleared V15 of any wrongdoing in its collaboration with One Voice. But former Netanyahu campaign manager Aaron Shaviv called for reopening the investigation into V15 in response to the Senate report. Laura?
Thank you, Kalev. Chances of achieving a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians is becoming more remote and is approaching the point of no return. This, according to Nikolai Mladenov, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process. Speaking to reporters yesterday at the UN headquarters in Jerusalem, he warned that the failure of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to act along with leaders from the international community will only lead to further violence and deterioration.
And it's time both for the international community and for the leadership on both sides to wake up. Fundamentally, if we depart from the very concept that there should be two states living side by side in peace and security, we will be underwriting a blank check to violence and to radicalism in this part of the world for generations to come.
And joining us now in the studio to discuss some of the topics that made headlines this week is senior columnist for the Jerusalem Post, Amos Asael. Amos,
hi, Laura.
Thanks for being with us, as always. It appears that Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot is going ahead with plans to appoint Colonel Eyal Karim to the Army's next chief chaplain. This despite the controversy surrounding some of the very, very questionable things Karim has made in the past. What are your thoughts on that appointment?
I think that the statements he has made, he has now improved the impression with a corrective statement that he's made, whereby he concedes that the contribution of every soldier, regardless of inclination and persuasion and sex and nationality, is important, and that, I think, satisfies people.
Lip service.
Well, maybe, but what really should have been explored more thoroughly by Eisenkot in appointing him was the specific theological school he comes from. But Eisenkot does not understand enough in that, as do most secular Israelis, and Eisenkot rightly looked much more crucially at his military background, which is obviously impressive. He was a commando, he was a senior officer in the paratroopers. All this is right and indispensable, but insufficient. And in terms of his theology, he comes from a school which is very narrow-minded, and the most glaring thing missing from his resume is some secular higher education, which he simply does not have, and I think he lacks exposure to the modernity that is out there, and he needs to cope with.
Is this a mistaken appointment?
Time will tell. There certainly could have been better choices.
Motz, Finance Minister Moshe Kachlon announced plans to lower income tax for Israelis earning up to 13,000 shekels, as well as for companies. This decision goes against the Bank of Israel Governor Karnit Flug's recommendation of raising taxes. How would you rate Kachlon's performance so far as the finance minister?
Well, his performance is reasonable. He certainly understands the subject matter. This is the good news. The bad news is that he represents a smaller party than the prime minister's and one that rivals the prime minister's party. And he therefore has the temptation to be populistic, if even only in a measured way, unfortunately not in a drastic way. This, unfortunately might be part of it. He wants to reach the next election as someone who's left more available income in the pockets of potential voters. The same thing we see in his what he hopes will be his banking reform, which hopes to make it simpler to open new banks in Israel and to this way ease credit restrictions. That too might make people here get much easier access to credit that will be used not in order to set up new businesses, which everybody wants, but in order to accelerate consumerist expenses, and that's bad.
Turning to the international scene, the Washington Post is reporting that U.S. and Russia are discussing joint military operations in Syria. How is this cooperation viewed in Jerusalem?
I think that this, if it actually transpires, would be positive against the backdrop of what is happening in the Middle East, where someone needs to restore a measure of discipline and some kind of international order. There is complete international lawlessness right now in the region with multiple civil wars. And this is an aftershock or an aftermath of a complete departure of the kind of order that was imposed by superpower rivalry in the past, which also implied some superpower cooperation and balances of terror. If indeed an American-Russian dialogue now ensues and some cooperation results from it, I think it will be for the region's better.
One last question, turning to political developments in the UK. How do you think Jerusalem views the appointments of the new Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister?
I think we should envy the British for the swiftness and the elegance with which they have so far handled what they faced unexpectedly the morning after Brexit. Everybody expected a protracted process of a succession process. Instead of that, they made it very brief, they made it very decisive, and their new prime minister is now empowered and enjoys a comfortable parliamentary majority. And I think that, as she promises, she will lead Britain into a brave new future.
And the exit of David Cameron, quite elegant.
Yes, and respectable, and that's why I think the whole world should learn from the British. They really are more politically experienced than practically everyone, even the Americans, and it shows.
Motz Asayel, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Laura.
This week marks the 10th anniversary of the Second Lebanon War. The IDF faced major criticism for its unpreparedness for that war and so-called failures in its battles against Hezbollah. Commander of the division that bore the brunt of the combat, Brigadier General Gal Hirsch, was particularly criticized and forced out of the military. A decade after the war, IBA's Ari O'Sullivan sat down with Hirsch, who says the war was a victory, but he felt stabbed in the back.
We've never enjoyed such a period along the Israeli-Lebanese border. Never. Deterrence, such alike, never happened in this front. This theater, since the beginning of the 70s, was full of blood, traumatic memories, terrible events, battles and wars. And in the last 10 years, for the first time, Israeli boys and girls go to school. You know, they've never sit in the shelter, never heard siren like what happened to us during Protective Edge 2 years ago, for an example. In the north, everything is quiet. So the word failure does not describe, just as I felt during the battles, during the war, the word failure is a big mistake.
You seem to be motivated by a desire to clear your name.
I won't call it clear my name or rehabilitation. As I mentioned before, I felt quite okay with my performance and my division's performance in the battlefield. I knew that we've fulfilled all our missions and did good. But the war, 2006 war, was badly criticized. And the way that the story has been delivered to the Israeli society was unbelievable for me. You know, when I left the battlefield and came back to Israel and opened the TV, I wanted to run back to Lebanon. I could not believe that this story of battles, quite successful battles in South Lebanon, has been transformed into such unbelievable stories that the Israeli media wrote and many interessants unfortunately wrote.
Did you feel that after the Second Lebanon War they were looking for a scapegoat?
Well, I think that the way that I was treated after the 2006 war was not appropriate way. Mm-hmm. I think that it was indecent and there was injustice, yes. Because after the war, I could feel that I've been stabbed in my back during the war. Wow. But I could not do anything, because I was very, very much focused in defeating the enemy. And I was focused in being a division commander and not in being a combat politician. I'm not a combat politician. I've never been, and probably I won't be.
Gal, you dedicated most of your life to the military, and you were destined for top leadership in the IDF command, but then your wings were clipped, and then again with police commissioner. How do you feel about that?
I wanted very much to serve my country, my homeland. You know, this is the most important thing for me, to serve the state of Israel. So, of course, it was a big frustration and a big disappointment to leave the Israel Defense Forces after 2006 war with not a real reason. And I was very proud to be called always to any mission, and probably I'll keep calm always to the flag.
You talk about combat politicians. Are we going to see you in politics? If you couldn't go this way, maybe you'd come this way?
Well, I'm not sure that political life really suits me. I find myself much more comfortable in lead people, educate people, and do my best for the state of Israel in many other ways. Since I saw firsthand what happens with combat politics, and I do not like it at all, I'm not sure that political life really suits me.
So you speak about your wanting to continue to contribute.
Yeah.
How are you going to do that? Where are you going?
It's a good question. And don't forget to call me for the next interview when I'll make this decision.
Okay.
Raed Khalil, the Palestinian terrorist who stabbed 2 Israelis to death when he walked into a Judaica store in Tel Aviv's Panorama building and attacked Jewish worshippers, was convicted this morning on 2 charges of murder and 3 charges of attempted murder at the Tel Aviv District Court. Khalil pled guilty to the charges. Last November, Khalil, the father of 5 and a resident of the West Bank town of Dura, walked into the store where Jews were attending an afternoon mincha service and attacked them. 2 Israelis murdered in the attack, Aviram Reuven and Aaron Yesayev, were stabbed repeatedly in the upper body and succumbed to their wounds. 3 other Israelis were also injured in the attack. Khalil was apprehended by bystanders who subdued him until police forces arrived at the site. After a 7-year hiatus, Israel yesterday opened the Erez border crossing into northern Gaza to commercial vehicles and goods entering the Strip for the first time since Hamas took control of the Gaza enclave. A spokesman for the Defense Ministry's coordination of government activities in the territories said the step was taken to facilitate the work of Palestinian importers, thereby assisting the economy in the Gaza Strip. Until now, the North Gaza crossing was open to individuals in transit, but no goods or vehicles were allowed and were instead transferred via the Kerem Shalom border crossing between Israel and southern Gaza. In a case provoking major controversy across the Jewish world, the Supreme Rabbinical Court yesterday declined to accept conversions performed by the Orthodox Rabbi Heskel Lookstein of New York. Jewish Agency Chairman Natan Sharansky attended the protest last week outside the Chief Rabbinate and spoke to IBA's Elon Aslan-Levy about diaspora-Israel relations.
The draw for diaspora Jews to come to Israel is the quality of Jewish life in Jewish state. That with all our problems and with all our infightings, we should not forget that by far the most comfortable place for Jew to live in integrity, not a double life, is the state of Israel. One of the pushing factors from France and from Europe can be the fact that they feel that it's less that type of liberal Europe which they loved. This combination of being liberal, democratic, and at the same time being Jewish, what makes it so attractive.
Are you concerned by a growing gulf between diaspora and Israeli Jewry, and what do you think is responsible for it?
I don't believe that there is growing gulf. To the contrary, there is growing interdependence. Two major challenges which we face is assimilation on one hand and the legitimization of Israel on the other. And to fight against assimilation, for continuity, Jews of diaspora discovered that they need the state of Israel. And Israel discovers again and again how much it needs world Jewry at the times when our enemies try to delegitimize us.
You've written before that liberal Europe is becoming increasingly hostile to the very idea of a Jewish state. Why is this?
Well, that's the result of this policy of multiculturalism, which now it's already 2 generations after the Second World War, when first intellectuals, and then philosophers, then sociologists, and then politicians of Europe decided that in order to have no war, we have to give away our identity, religious identity, national identity. All the wars were because of our differences. Now let's remove these differences. So it happened so that the idea of Jewish state was born when national states was a very popular issue, but the implementation of it came when the national state became only as a symbol of the new wars. So as a result, there is ideological resistance to the idea of Jewish state. On the other hand, at the same time, this feeling of guilt of the free world towards their colonial past created, and this belief that all the values are relative, it created a situation when there are tens of millions of new citizens of Europe who really don't share the values of the Europe itself.
This leaves European Jews with a choice, either to join the criticism against Israel or to support it and pay the price. Which way do you think they're going in reality?
In the last years, more than 1% of Jewish community moves from France to Israel every year. I can say such type of phenomena we never had in any country of the free world. So the facts speak for themselves.
Every wave of mass migration has changed the face of Israeli society. How do you think that a mass migration of Western Jews, in particular from France, might shape Israeli society and in particular its attitudes towards religion and state?
Aliyah from France is very much traditional Aliyah. If you compare it with the big wave of Aliyah from the former Soviet Union, where overwhelming majority was absolutely disconnected from anything Jewish. They are people who feel very close to the tradition, to the history, and to the state of Israel. On the other hand, we should not forget that these are people who are coming from the free world, and I don't think that they would like the fact that there will be too much interference to their private life and the way how they are worshipping.
To what extent do you believe that Israel should take into account the beliefs and opinions of diaspora Jewry who aren't citizens in setting its own policy?
The state of Israel sees itself as the home for all the Jews. And that's why its top priority must be to make every Jew and every community in the world to feel here at home. And that's why every issue discussed in Israel, which has influence on the life of Jews from diaspora, definitely which has an influence on the status of the Jews of diaspora in Israel, we have to take into account, and we have to be very sensitive to their needs.
Turning to England, where Theresa May entered 10 Downing Street last night as Britain's new Prime Minister, accepting an invitation to form a government from the Queen. This after winning the Conservative Party leadership contest when Prime Minister David Cameron announced he would resign in the wake of Britain's vote to leave the European Union. Yesterday, Cameron bade farewell to the House of Commons after 6 years, 2 months, and 2 days on the job.
Yes, we can be pretty tough and test and challenge our leaders, perhaps more than some other countries, but that is something we should be proud of, and we should keep at it. And I hope you will all keep at it, and I will you on as you do. The last thing I'd say is that you can achieve a lot of things in politics. You can get a lot of things done, and that, in the end, the public service, the national interest, that is what it's all about. Nothing is really impossible if you put your mind to it. After all, as I once said, I was the future once. It has been the greatest honour of my life to serve our country as Prime Minister over these last 6 years, and to serve as leader of my party for almost 11 years. And as we leave for the last time, my only wish is continued success for this great country that I love so very much. Thank you.
The new Prime Minister wasted no time forming a new government, surprising many by appointing former London Mayor Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary. Philip Hammond, the former Foreign Secretary, will move to the Treasury. May also honoured a pledge to appoint a minister for Brexit, placing David Davis in charge of manoeuvring Britain out of the EU. Theresa May is known as a strong friend of the British Jewish community and of the State of Israel. She visited Jerusalem in June 2014 and, on the night before her appointment, honored a dinner date with Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mirvis.
Following the referendum, we face a time of great national change. And I know, because we're Great Britain, that we will rise to the challenge. As we leave the European Union, we will forge a bold, new, positive role for ourselves in the world. And we will make Britain a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us. That will be the mission of the government I lead, and together we will build a better Britain.
Back here at home, Israel's 2016 Olympic team attended a memorial service in Tel Aviv for the 11 Israeli athletes massacred at the 1972 Munich Olympics. The 48 qualifiers for this year's Olympic Games at Rio de Janeiro laid a wreath yesterday on the memorial, paying their respects to the sportsmen who were murdered before their time. Before setting out for Brazil, the team took time to pose for photographs with Culture and Sports Minister Miri Regev. Among the young athletes hoping for glory at this year's Olympic Games were 27-year-old former judo world champion Yarden Jerbi and windsurfer Shachar Tsubari, who won a bronze at the Beijing Olympics.
You know, the competition in judo, it can end very fast. You can lose and win in 1 second, so it's a very complicated day. But my main thing is to fight each moment on the mat and to be the best I can, to be strong-minded, and I believe in myself.
It's a great feeling being here this time and seeing all the great athletes Israel have. And I guess my chances this year, they are pretty good, but the competition is tough.
In local money matters, shares were mixed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange and end-of-week trading, while the shekel strengthened in foreign currency trading. Here are the numbers. Turning to the weather, and forecasters say the temperatures will remain the same over the weekend, with chances of a brief respite from the heat on Sunday. Here are the highs and lows at home and abroad. And that's all for this newscast. We'll be back here on Sunday for more breaking news from Israel. Until then, I'm Laura Cornfield, wishing you a great weekend, and shalom from Jerusalem.